Hi everyone, welcome back to Game Maker Cast. It's Mickey, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can create this game right here. It's going to be another Games Over Lunch where we create this game called Keep It Up, where we basically have a paddle moving left and right, and we need to keep this ball up in the air and to see how high a score we can get. So that's the game, so let's roll the intro and let's get started making it from scratch. Now, I have my starter project here in front of me, and you can download it in the description below. If you're looking for the full source code, you can grab it from the Patreon post. I will say that I am using a sound effect, and you can find it in the sources here, so this is the only thing that I haven't created, and it's just a funny bounce that we're going to be using. So with that information, let's take a look at how our room is set up. We have our room init and our room game. Inside the room init is going to be our initialization variable, and we'll check that out because it's something that's already coded. We open up the create event, and you can see we're just setting our score to 0. We're setting a global variable, a Boolean to say false. Then we're just going to the main game room. Once the main game room actually loads up, you can see that we have the ball, the player, and then up here at the top, we have an object score. We're going to quickly take a look at that because that one is already coded as well. If we look at the create event, you can see that I'm using a scale. And then the scale is just going to lerp from whatever position it is back to 1 using a 60% over time. So every step, whatever the scale is, 60% until it gets to 1, and then it will just stay at 1. And then we are checking to see if the game has started. If it hasn't started, we'll listen for a mouse button release. Then once the mouse button releases, we're able to start our game. So the reason we're using the scale is because in the draw event, we're just using the scale. So whenever the ball bounces, the text kind of flashes, goes a little bit bigger, and then scales back down. And if the game hasn't started, we'll just display the click to play. So if we run our starter project, this is what we're going to end up with. Something looks like this, and when we click to play, nothing's going to happen. So with that information, let's actually start on some of the first objects. And the first object we're going to look at is the object ball. So we have a create event and we have a step event. In the create event, I've left some of the variables in here. We have the gravity of the ball, and then the horizontal and vertical movement of the ball. So we don't need to change these, but you can play around with them if you need it. In the step event, this is where we're going to be actually making the ball move. The first thing we need to do is we need to check to see if the game has started. If the game hasn't started, let's just say return, so that we'll exit the step event. So no code underneath here will be run if the game hasn't started. So that will keep our ball in place until we click that button and change this global field. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some vertical movement in. So I'm going to be adding the gravity to my vertical movement. So this will make my ball fall down. And remember, the gravity is set at 0.6. So it'll make the ball fall a little bit slower. And what I want to do with the horizontal movement is when we move it left or right, say 10 pixels, 3 pixels, whatever, I always want it to come back to 0. And the reason for that is when we bring it back to 0, it will kind of look like the ball shoots a little bit off to the side and then comes to a standstill. So we can use a lerp function to get away with this. We can just say lerp the horizontal movement between whatever pixel number that is to the number 0 using a certain percentage over time, and that will bring our horizontal movement back to 0. Before we add this information in, the horizontal vertical movement, we have to check to see if we're colliding with something. And in particular, we need to check to see if we're colliding with the wall because we need to bounce off of it. So we're going to be using a place meeting check. So we'll say if place meeting or X position plus wherever we're moving to, or Y position plus wherever we're moving to. If it collides with the object wall, then in here, what do we want to do? Well, first, let's just take our horizontal movement. We'll say times equal -1. So we're going to flip the horizontal movement. So if we are moving, say, to the left, which is a negative number, if we multiply a negative number by a negative number, it will become a positive number. So then we'll start moving to the right. The next thing I want to do is I want to add some effects in here. So I'm going to add the image X scale. I'm going to decrease it to 0.6. And then for the image Y scale, I'm going to increase it to 1.6. So that will give it a kind of a stretchy, bouncy effect. Now, the next thing I want to do is play that sound that I talked about earlier. So in here, I have a wrapper function just called play sound, and I'll pass it a sound clip. If we take a look at this wrapper function, all we're basically doing is we're changing the pitch to something higher or lower, and it's a random range. And then we're just going to play the sound, so we don't have to worry about writing these two lines every single time we want to play a sound. Now there are some drawbacks with this, but I mean, this is a prototype, so it works pretty good. Now, once we have done those two things and we've checked our horizontal movement, the next thing we need to do is just add onto our X position our horizontal movement, and on the Y position, we're going to add our vertical movement in. So finally, we can start getting some movement here. And all I want to do is I'm going to add an image angle to make it seem like we're moving left or right. So the image angle is going to be either 1 or -1. And I can get this by using the sign of horizontal movement. Horizontal movement will basically decrease everything down to a -1, a 0, or a 1 value. I highly suggest you play around with it if you're not familiar with it. But we're going to say sign horizontal movement. Because I want my ball to kind of move faster, I'm going to times this value by 4, so whatever this is. And then I'm going to take the product of this, so this would be either a -4 or 4, and I'm going to times it by -1 to reverse it. So if I'm moving to the left, I want my ball to be spinning to the left instead of the right. So this will handle that. And the final thing we're needing to do here is with this image X scale and Y scale, we'll copy and paste this in, is all we want to do is take whatever the current position is. We're going to use a lerp function to say, take me from the current back to a 1%, or sorry, a normal lerp function here, a normal 1 X scale and normal 1 Y scale. So anytime our X scale changes, it's going to slowly go back to the regular 1. Now, this is all we really need for the ball here. It's pretty simple. Now, we only check to see if we were colliding with the wall. So let's actually open up the paddle and let's do some of the stuff here. So in here, we have a create event, we have a step event, and then we also have a key up for R just to restart our room in case things go a little bit off. In the create event, we already have some variables. We have our randomize, our lerp speed, bounce speed, the instant score, because we're going to be adding to the score, and then the ball force of moving up and down. Now, what we want to do is we want to get the player moving left and right, and we're going to use the step event. And again, we're going to use that special lerp function. So we're going to lerp between the current X value and the mouse X at whatever we set that lerp speed to be. And that will get our paddle moving back and forth. So actually, let's hit F5 and see what's going on here. So you can see that my paddle is now moving back and forth. If I click to play, you can see our ball just falls down. So that's where we are. The next step, what we want to do is get that ball bouncing off of our player. Now to do this, we're going to add an event and we're going to say collision, objects, and when our player collides with the ball, this is what we want to have happen. Now I will say that this collision event right here is going to always refer to our sprite mask. So if I check out my player and I bring down my collision mask, you can see that I'm only halving my sprite. So if the ball collides somewhere here at the bottom where my collision mask does not exist, this function will not run, and that's just something to keep in mind. Let's maximize this because we're going to have a bunch of code in here. So what I want to do is every single time that the player hits the ball, we're going to change the maximum horizontal movement of that particular ball. So what I want to do is I want to figure out the maximum horizontal movement between whatever the max number of 3 and the number of bounces we have taken. Now, I'm going to use a low number to increase the bounce each time, but you can use something else. So the higher score you get, the more difficult the game will be. So we're going to be using this later on, but we do need to calculate the max horizontal movement. The next thing I want to do is, because we are within this collision event, and remember this is a special collision event, we have access to the word other. So with other, which is the ball, I want to change the vertical movement to be equal to the negative ball force of whatever we set on the create event. So it's set to 20 so that our ball will move up 20 pixels. Now also with other, I want to set the horizontal movement to be a random range. And we're going to make a random range between negative, the maximum horizontal movement, and positive horizontal movement. So this will be normally for the first little bit, -3 to +3 until we increase the bounces. The next thing I need to do is add in a little bit of effect. So with other, again, we're going to change the image X scale. And we're going to set this one to 1.6 and set the image Y scale, on the other object, image Y scale to 0.6. So we are stretching this out a little bit wider and a little bit smaller. Now we're going to add something into the bounce. So every single time our paddle hits the ball, we're going to increase our bounce by 0.2. Next, we also need to increase our score. Now, this score is a built-in variable, so I don't really have to do anything like a global in front of it. It's automatically going to pick up, so we can use it and we can just say score plus equals 1. And next, we need to update this score object. And this score object, once again, it exists in our room here at the top. So right now, we have a variable for this, but you can see it's set to no one. So we need to actually find the score object within our room. So we can say if the instance score does equal no one, then let's set the instance score to be instance find, and we're looking for the object score and the first one. Now, after that check, we can see, or we could check to say if instance score does not equal no one. And the reason we're doing this in 2 different checks is because the first time it comes in, it's going to try and find that instance. And if it finds it for the first time, then we can update the score instead of waiting another bounce for everything to happen. But anyway, if we have an instance score, then we're just going to say the instance score dot scale equals 1.2, and we'll check this out in a second. But this is basically, this is the scale of the font going up and down. And the final thing I want to do is say play sound and play the SND bounce sound. Okay, so with that done, if we check out our score, once again, remember, like I said, the scale is just the X and Y scale of that particular font. Let's give our game a go and see if we can get things colliding or figure out what we missed here. So you can see I have to click to play. Then once I do, we have our ball bouncing. We have those special effects. And hopefully after a little bit here of me wasting some time talking, you should be able to see that the ball is going to start moving pretty far left and right. So I guess we could have added in some debug, but you'll just have to trust me on this here. But I think our game is done. Our prototype is done. And besides doing the art, you can see the code really wasn't that much. Now, there are probably some bugs left in the game, like bouncing off the wall and stuff. But you can see everything's working pretty good. But anyway, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you everyone for watching the video. Thank you for subscribing, liking, leaving comments, whatever it needs to be. Just a huge thank you to everyone. A special shout out to the following people in no particular order: Darth Wolf, Andrea, Vil, Edward, Ashby, Annie, Ian, Robert, Victor, Lucas, Paul, Blunt BSC, and Angel. Once again, thank you everyone who is watching. You can find all the links and everything in the description below, and I'll see you in the next video.